Alright, hello, and welcome to a talk on Henads and Henadology with me, Aloysius, Lishima, Demosphactes and Cultivate Virtue. So, um, go introduce yourselves, I guess.
Hello, everyone. I am Demos, and I'm here. I don't know how to introduce myself.
Well, it's just
I,
me,
I
because we don't have like a fancy photo that lights up, so we just have to make sure people know who's talking.
yeah, it's Demosphactes, and I know very little about Platonism, but I try. So I will speak on what I know on the subject, which is not much, but I don't think that anyone knows much about the Henads. It is a very obscure subject, and I hope we don't bungle it.
What one would hope, right?
Yeah.
Good,
And
good. Well, my name's Eric. Go by Cultivate Virtue online. I make Platonic and pagan art, and I also do some work with the Orthodox Temple of Natural Religion, working on trying to build pagan communities. So I know a good deal about Platonism, I guess, as much as anybody can, but I'm definitely not as well versed in this. Like Demo said, it's kind of a more obscure topic, I guess, within Platonism. So interested to hear more about it and chime in any way I can.
we wanted to have more people today, but strangely enough, recording on New Year's Eve does not cause people to be available. I don't, I don't know why.
Yeah, I was I squeezed it in barely, so it's not the most opportune time, but we're here.
We had to find a time where more than two people were available.
Yeah.
It's definitely better than it would be tomorrow morning. I think that would be much worse.
I don't think anyone would have been
Y-
available.
Yeah, that would be a total no-go.
All right, so the discussion topic being Henads and Henadology, I was inspired by somebody just absolutely butchering any like understanding of the Henads. You know, in the typical way, saying that, I don't worship Zeus or Jove, but rather the Sky King. Ooh. And that pissed me off, frankly. And it reminded me sort of the necessity of a proper understanding of the Henads and why you can't just get rid of, like, Zeus in favor of like the upper echelon, nor can you get rid of like Zeus Lycos or Zeus Cassius or all the various aspects that were worshipped at particular temples all across the world.
Yeah,
And
well,
well, oh yeah, go ahead.
it would be it would be it's quite important to not define the Henads because I don't think any of us can do that. But it would be important to understand that the Henads are a way in which we can access, so to speak, the One. And the reason Proclus posited the Henads was because if you do not posit the Henads, it becomes impossible for man to have any connection to the One, however tenuous. In the Platonic system, if looked at as a whole, you cannot have any contact with the One because the One is beyond being and it is the only truly unknowable thing by any other thing which is not itself. So how does man have access to the how can we even talk about it? So you need to posit the Henads. It is a necessity to posit the Henads. So however you interpret this the Proclean system, in Platonism, you have to posit something at least like the Henads in order to have a chain that links, mortal man to the One. So misunderstandings about the Henads may come into play, but it is important to state that you cannot avoid positing at least something like the Henads, because otherwise you have the One, and you have the created universe where we are. So how do we even have a conception of the One? Something must reach down, and so the Henads go through all the layers of existence. Something must reach down from the One that has something of the essence of the One, right down to us. And we, through ritual, we know that, I mean, if you perform it correctly, that this is the gods, right? You feel that connection, that link. So any misunderstanding about the Henads might come in on the intellectual level, but the connection is there in ritual, and I think anyone who has performed a correct ritual has felt it.
Yeah, I mean that just about covers it. But getting more specific, it's in that to understand the Henads, which ultimately anyone with any shred of understanding wants to do, it's a totally different matter, and why you shouldn't just simply discard the lower emanations of the Henad, so to speak. Why must we, as philosophers, worship Zeus specifically? Why shouldn't we just cross over to the higher Zeus, to which we have no efficient name? That's not really particularly Hellenic, or the Jade Emperor, which is not particularly Chinese, for lack of a better term. I mean, there's the matter that, it's simply difficult to understand how can all of these self-contradictory concepts be contained within wholly within something without contradiction is a little difficult for most people to understand.
Well, you can't. The thing is that we are a specific type of life, right? Amphibian life. We are where we are in the cosmic scheme of things. We cannot have access to the higher Zeus above the plane of intellection. It's not. It's impossible. So we are where we are, and the Henads. The whole idea is that the gods reach out from beyond being and appear, not directly, but through intermediaries, to us. So the only Zeus that we can worship is the Zeus that we know. And that's the magic of the Henads, so to speak, that you can worship a local cult, and that connects you directly to the first principle. So I don't. There's a common mistake that Christians often make. That I heard a Christian the other day say that God prevented me from turning a street where I could have been raped or something. And it's a very silly way to think that because for Christians their God they see him as the first principle or the equivalent of the first principle. It's very silly to think that the first principle directly comes down and helps you in your everyday life. But that's the misunderstanding that the Henads clear. How does something that is beyond being have any relation to our lives? So you have to go through the gods as are known through the rites, which ultimately there are daemons in between, of course, but there's a whole series of intellects that connect us to the gods. But you have to go through that chain. You cannot worship. Of course, you cannot worship the one, except in absolute silence. But in worship itself requires the Henads, is what I'm trying to say. So you have to go to your local. You have to approach the gods through their known forms, because that is the operation of the Henads.
Yeah, I would be inclined to agree. Also, in the sense, of the more personal worship, the Henadological Zeus, also embodies things that we simply could not understand. The Zeus of horses, for example. Horses, as all other things, worship the gods in their sense. But we could not understand the Zeus of horses. The Zeus of horses is, of course, directly related to the experience of horseness. Something most humans are likely not to engendered with, or elephants, or dogs, or what have you. Or maybe a totally different wholly sapient species like humans, but or hermaphroditic slugs, or have 17 genders, or 17 sexes, as you find among some eusocial creatures, and the particular manifestation of the gods and their aspects would be totally different, because their experiences and thus knowledge base would be absolutely incomparable. And thus trying to skip straight to the Henad instead of going through the intermediaries essentially means that you would be attempting to understand something that is just totally ununderstandable from your knowledge base. Whereas Zeus, in particular, is how the Hellenic people at the time could understand the king in heaven, so to speak, and thus is a reflection of their sort of a national nature, their ethnos, and their moral beliefs, and how would they perceive the ultimate patriarch, and thus is sort of a reflection of that. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that the Hellenes are a reflection of that particular Zeus's nature.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a good way to put it. I mean, the thing is that if we agree with Proclus that the Henads exist above being, then even trying to talk about their essence is pointless. It is, what are you going to say? They are beyond being. There is nothing at all to say, and there is nothing at all to know. So if we trust that the culturally specific forms that have come down to us are based on a method of connecting to that, then that is the only method that we have. There cannot be any other method, because if we go by the philosophic path, we can climb up, but we will hit a wall, and that wall is impassable. We cannot go through, because if they are beyond being, that's it. You have to give up. There is no philosophizing to be done at that point. So you have to, I don't know if you've seen The Fountain, but at the end where he just surrenders to awe, you just have to surrender at that point. So the philosophic tools can take us to a certain point, but after that, you have to trust the rites. And some have said that the concept of the Henads is Proclus's concession to popular religion, but that's sort of an atheistic way of looking at it, because it's not a concession, it's Proclus coming in at a point in time when, the Roman Empire was dying and Greek culture was under attack by Christianity. So things which in antiquity would have been left unspoken needed to be elaborated upon in philosophical language. So, with all the limitations of philosophical language, he attempted to do just that. So, it's not really a concession to popular religion, it's just coming in at a time when popular religion is under attack and some people are trying to destroy it, and saying that, okay, this is how it works, because at this point in time we need to hunker down and fight back. So these are the tools that we need to do that. And this is very pertinent today because we do not have the ancient world and all the framework of the ancient world. So we do need to speak of these things in philosophical terms. And we need to justify the rights, so to speak, because we are trying to bring them back and set them back up when for many millennia they have been dormant.
Well, I would also say it's important to note when we talk about the Henads, at least in terms of Proclus, we should also understand it, essentially as a codification of pre-existing concepts in the Hellenistic world. Anyone with more than two brain cells to rub together in the Hellenistic world understood that Marduk was Zeus, but was distinct, and the worship needed to remain distinct. There was a different concept. There were different ideas and different principles behind Marduk and Zeus, even though they, were ultimately the same in their nature. Same with Aphrodite and Ishtar, even though the worship of Aphrodite in the Hellenic world originated from the cult of Ishtar. It's still fundamentally different, and it should remain that way. And by codifying this in a philosophical language, it turns it from merely being is it Interpreteo Graeca, or is it just a different name for a god, and more of a understanding that this is a sort of a distinct sub-being that contains some of the multiplicity of the Henad, of the higher god, without contradiction.
Yeah. Since talking about the essence of Zeus, there are many Zeuses, of course. The Henads are different on each level, right? So Proclus had a very Baroque categorization where he explained all the levels as he saw them. But to speak of the highest Zeus, there is nothing at all to say. The only thing that you can say is what has been revealed by the lowest Zeus, because we are, whether we like it or not, at the lowest point in the celestial hierarchy. So to ask in what way is Zeus different from Marduk or from all the various balls or the various forms of Zeus, or even from Dionysus, is pointless if we are asking about their essence on the level above being, because who knows? We will never know. It is impossible to know unless it has been revealed. So these things are revealed on our level. So we get mythology, and we get various stories about the gods, and we get various attributes of the gods. Those don't necessarily speak about the gods on their highest level, but it is our way of understanding them and interacting with them. And this revelation, for example, if you read the Orphic theogonies about how Zeus devours Phanes, the firstborn, the first revealed god, and becomes the highest god in this manner. This is a way to speak about things on the highest level that are understandable by us on the lowest level. So the best we can do is talk about things as have been revealed to us on our level, and not ask questions like what is the real essence of Zeus that makes him different from Marduk, because that is a question that we cannot give an answer to unless we go through the mythic language and speak of the things that have been revealed to us about it.
I will also say, Eric, don't be shy. You can talk up. You can ask questions.
Yeah, I'm just listening. It's I got a couple thoughts on it, but I'll chime in, I'm sure.
I mean, do it now. I mean, I've run out of things to ramble on about this particular topic.
I mean, I think it's interesting. I've definitely read Proclus's work on the Henads and things that he says about them, and I always, to be quite honest, find it kind of cryptic. I didn't necessarily understand what he meant by it. Even in Helios' book, when he starts talking about sort of the nature of what the gods are and saying that the Henads are these unities and all of that, I find that kind of language very obscure, and maybe that's partly what Demos is talking about, is kind of by its very nature, it has to be obscure. It's we're kind of piercing into the unknown, so to speak, and so it might be beyond our understanding. I think the thing that keeps coming up for me that I'm very interested in is how these ideas turn into something that's exoteric and something that the average person can understand. And maybe that's just because that's kind of something I've been ruminating about for several months. How do we take these more complex philosophical topics and explain them to the average person? I almost think of kind of like the elevator pitch for what we're doing. And if you had 5 seconds or 10 minutes or just a few minutes with somebody to explain what are the gods, what exactly would we say, I feel like we would probably don't want to get into Henadology too specifically, but I like what you're saying as far as we can, the version of the gods that we can understand is really just this kind of lower level version that we kind of understand through the myths and revelations.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I was going to say that, like, essentially the process of understanding the gods and like the higher and whatnot, it seems obscure, but that's largely because of people have largely learned to trust the sensible world rather than the rational one. I mean, Plato talks about this with his famous allegory. The hit, his big hit, the cave, where we see but images, but by trusting in one's reason and intuition, and not trusting in one's senses, one can the whole Henads thing becomes a lot easier to swallow, I find. You can go, Demos.
As regards what do we say to someone who asks what the gods are, unfortunately, the answer must be, if they're asking about what they truly are, their essence, the answer must disappoint, because the answer is, who knows, we can never know, forget about it. Unless you join a god in their train, as discussed in the Republic, unless you join a god in their train and sort of merge with them, although you don't merge with them, just follow them, but unless you go to that place and be given direct revelation of that god's essence, you can't know that. So while we are alive right here, right now, it is impossible to answer that question. But one way that I like to think about it is that think about the gods as this one unified substance without differentiation, right? So you have God. And then you take the world and you dunk it into that substance and submerge it into that substance. The world has multiplicity, right? There are this thing and that thing, as the Tao Te Ching says, the 10,000 things. So, per the Tao Te Ching, the eternal way is not the way that can be named, but the way of the 10,000 things, the way of multiplicity, can be named. It has many names. It's all the things that exist. So if you take the world and dunk it into God, suddenly you have gods everywhere, because the various parts of the world, which have multiplicity, unlike this one unknowable substance of divinity, suddenly become illuminated in different ways according to their nature, because they now exist inside the substance of God. So while we cannot know what that substance is looking at it from the outside, we can know what it is in the way that it interacts with the multitude of things in the world, because it is immersed in it. And suddenly you have, as the Greeks said, there are gods everywhere. You know, if you go to a forest grove, there are a myriad gods there. In your apartment, there are myriad gods there. There are gods everywhere. But that is because they exist, the world exists inside divinity. So the Henads are just a way to speak about how different parts of the multiplicity of the world are illuminated by that which is beyond being and which is unknowable. And I think that this is a good way to stop thinking about polytheism and monotheism, because as far as I'm concerned, that distinction is pointless. Depends on how you look at it. If you look at it from the highest principle, there is one God, in the sense that if you can say that the one is God, you really shouldn't, but if you want to say that that which allows divinity to be divine is itself a God, you can say that. But if you look at the world with its multiplicity, there are many gods. So it's just a matter of where you are. But we are in this world right now, and in this world there are many gods.
Well, I mean, to talk back on, like, you're seeing things from the external perspective. It is simply impossible. You cannot cease being yourself. I mean, that's
Yeah.
one of the failures of, like, the materialistic science view of the world, is this idea that one can be objective, but one cannot. Because that would, surmise is to say that one can cease being one's own self, to stop seeing through one's own eyes. I mean, and I feel like that's kind of the point of, like, the bhakti movements and whatnot. It is to attempt to understand the higher by understanding one's self more. In aligning oneself with a god that aligns with one's particular nature, one can understand that god all the more by self-examination. If one is a particularly like Apollo, and chooses Apollo as the object of one's view, like Julian did with Helios. He ascribed Helios as being all things, as his nature was particularly aligned to it, and he was in truth right in a sense. All gods are in all things, and thus one can understand all things through all gods. Yeah.
Well, without getting into the more technical and confusing side of the matter, obviously the one itself is what confers individuality on individual things. So each of us is experiencing the world in a first-person perspective because we have been given that attribute by the one, because the one is what gives oneness, individuality. So in a certain way, as these things always turn upon themselves, individuality is, if you turn it on its head, the way back to the one itself, because the one is oneness and confers oneness, which creates multiplicity, because now there are different ones. There was the one, and it confers individuality and oneness to many things, and now there are many things, but each thing is one. So through individuality, if we turn it on its head, we can get back to the one. And the solution that the Henads offer is something that is lacking in Plotinus. How is it even possible for us down here to go past all these levels of soul and mind and even have any contact with the one? And individuality, in a very confusing sense, because you have to transcend individuality through individuality, is a way to do that. In the way that you spoke, if I understood you correctly, about those movements.
Yeah, I would say you were talking about bhakti as a movement, and I think part of what they've kind of figured out is that, it boils down to devotion, which really boils down to cultivating a love for the gods, and it's that sort of force of love, or even eros as a god, that is that unitive element. It's that thing that can draw two things together into union, and through their devotion to the gods, that's their sort of pathway to find that union again.
Yeah, all proper practice and devotion is ultimately based in a manner that achieves a more perfect union. I mean, that's why marriage is a thing, ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
It is a reflection of achieving a oneness. You are achieving a oneness between two disparate things.
You need to be falling in love. You need to be love maxing.
You need to be
all about love
enjoying.
maxing.
Let this be a refutation of people that love suffering. I mean, that's ultimately one of the greatest lies of Christianity, is that life is misery. I disagree. It should be great. Actually, you should enjoy things. You should be suffused with a utter infatuation with all things that are good.
Misery is good insofar as it. I have a soft spot for misery because it allows you to have more fun. Without a miserable outlook, then you can't be lifted up. You need to be grumpy so that when you're happy, you're very happy. You know what I'm saying?
Well, we're all
You shouldn't be happy. You shouldn't be happy all the time.
Well, the grumpiness now is a result of the sort of descended nature of the era. In the Saturnine era, everyone was always happy all the time.
Yeah, it is an age of grumpiness now, I guess. It calls for grumpiness.
Well, yeah, you need to be grumpy now. I'm of course speaking, in big generalities of that sort of thing.
Well, since we're on Christianity, I would like to say that since we discussed, unless someone has anything else to say before I get into that.
Nope.
I wanted to, because we said that the culturally specific ways of approaching the gods are the only way we can approach God. So why can't we approach God through Trinitarian doctrine?
Because it's limiting. Ultimately.
What do you mean limited?
Well, I mean, Trinitarianism essentially limits the infinite to 3, which is absolutely insane when you get down to it.
Yeah. Yes, but what I was getting at is that Trinitarian doctrine, the Trinitarian doctrine of the Christians, is based on the Trinitarian understanding of the Platonists, which is that on every level of descending, unfolding of the one, each level of reality, there is a Trinitarian nature to how things unfold. So Proclus breaks it because he has four on some levels, but primarily the way that things unfold, if you look at them philosophically, is in threes. So the reason you cannot trust Trinitarian theology as Christianity presents it is because it is a garbled version of a philosophical system, not necessarily a theological system. It's a way of understanding divine matters through intellection, so it's a philosophical system. And they misappropriate it and try to make it something which it is not. So they hide the one through a false visage. They hide it through three faces, which are false. They're made up. It's a fairy tale. There is no such thing as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. It's fake. So the reason you cannot trust this system is because it doesn't speak about anything at all. It's made up. And it's hinting at a truth, because some theologians, I think it was Meister Eckhart,
Yes,
some mystical...
the one they were about to try for heresy before he died.
Exactly. I think it was Meister Eckhart who said that behind the Trinity there is the one, the Platonic one. He didn't say the Platonic one, but he said that the Trinity is what we describe as Henad. It is a way for man to have contact with that which is completely unknowable. And so there is a God behind, so to speak, or above the God that we know, which is heresy. And there is this Byzantine theologian, late Byzantine theologian called Gregory Palamas, who also tried to resolve the Christian problem and came up with this very popular, from what I understand, among orthobros idea that the energy and essence distinction, that we cannot possibly know the essence of God, but that God reaches down into our world with these energies, he called them, which interact with the world. And he was basically talking about what we're talking about now. And his opponents rightly said, well, you're just talking about the pagan gods. That's heresy. But he managed to convince them that it's not, so it was accepted in the end. But what I'm trying to say is that the Christians are facing a contradiction, because they're trying to speak about something which is real. There is a God, and we can have a relationship with God, but they bungle it with lies. So you can approach reality through a Christian lens, but you will be branded a heretic. You cannot approach truth through a Christian lens and be orthodox, because orthodoxy, Christian orthodoxy, is just lies. It's lies trying to hide the truth.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be the long and short of it, really. Like, the fact that a lot of people have tried to make sense out of it through a Platonic lens, and more often than not get literally burned for their troubles. Like, even if it was possible, any established like Christian organization has made it practically impossible. Which for a lot of the people that adopt Christianity largely do so out of practicality. That should be reason enough for them not to do it.
Yeah, paradoxically, perhaps the most, the maximally scam artisty version of Christianity, Mormonism, managed to get more things right than the sincere Christians, because even Mormons say there is no Trinity. What are you talking about? There's no such thing. The God of the Bible is a flesh and blood being. So even scam artists can have a better theology than Orthodox Christians. Sorry, Orthodox Christians. Your theology is a mess.
All right. So, does anyone else have anything to say, further about that particular thing, or should we move to maybe just discussing particular Henadologies? And because it's one thing to discuss it's important to understand the particular gods, to understand the Henad better, and it's another to more discuss a particular example.
Yeah, I don't have anything
Like
to add.
what?
I thought that those, yeah.
I mean, we could go with the Henadology. The first one that really got brought up, which is the Dionysus debacle, where you're dealing with first Dionysus and later Dionysus, and also Zeus's Dionysus, that sort of thing.
What do you mean?
Like the Orphics, in how I think the Orphics were essentially touching upon a Henadological distinction in how the god that we call Zagreus now, largely for important distinction, is Dionysus, as is traditionally also known, but different also.
Yeah, well, each cult, as in cultus, is approaching divinity through its particular lens. And we cannot say that all cults are equal. We can say that using the correct methodology, you can reach the same destination following every god, because all the gods are in all the gods. That's the nature of the Henads. All are in all. But we can say, I think I can agree that the Orphics had a particularly good methodology about climbing up the ladder through primarily Dionysus, Dionysus is in many respects their central god. And their methodology is good, and their mythic exposition is the best of its time. When they wrote their mythical expositions, which was 700, 600 BCE, it was the best mythical exposition around in the Greek-speaking world. And Plato and the Pythagoreans rightly credit them that, because at the time, in Greece, they had just gotten out of the Dark Ages, and they had lost a lot of theology. So you had to go to Egypt, which Pythagoras and Plato did, because in Egypt, priests had maintained good records, and they still had writings, and they still had knowledge, which had sadly been lost in Greece because they had lost their writing system, and many things had become lost. So you could go to Egypt, but another very good and much closer source for good theology was the Orphics, which had an excellent system.
Yeah. Well, I also speaking specifically, how does Zagreus, a very bleak, very severe god, by all understandings, the first of the dead, even, how is he the same as Dionysus? Is something that I think is why it's like, it's very easy to say that Marduk is Zeus and sort of like understand that they're both very kingly, they're lightning bolts, all the standard stuff. But in the sense of how is Zagreus Dionysus is why I think it's so effective, because you're essentially talking like a very bleak judge of the dead. While also touching upon the fact that, like Hades is also Zeus, because it was Hades that begot Zagreus as the dead. But also Zeus in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about the fact that the dead have access to divinity just as much as anyone else does, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the same thing that the Christians tried to take the harrowing of hell, so that you have the dead, and you might think that they're cut off from divinity, but no. Dionysus, Zagreus, dies, and divinity is right there among the dead, just as much as among the living. So I think that's what Zagreus being Dionysus in the underworld, a chthonic Dionysus, is about. It's about death and life as well, because the myth says that he was living and then he was dead. So Dionysus touches death as well.
Yeah. I mean, I also think that it sort of reveals a higher thing about, Dionysus, and like, Dionysus isn't like just all party and enjoying life, but he's all about doing things maximally, if you understand what I was
Yeah,
getting at.
drink yourself to death. Party to death.
Well, party maximally, be good maximally, be just maximally. Dionysus is the most maximal, and that is what he is fundamentally, and that I think that's like an important first step, in why I think like the Orphics came upon this knowledge through Dionysus fundamentally is I think, not to say that there are none, but there are few other gods with such a seeming contradiction amongst themselves. At least that were readily available to the Hellenes of the Dark Ages. I guess it was the Thracians.
Yeah.
I would say another aspect of that. I think that's totally right about him being kind of the maximum of all these different things. But I think there's something really important too in the idea of divine madness through Dionysus. That it's something to, I think, push us beyond the more sort of discursive and rational way of understanding things, and really push into something that's more noetic, to kind of take us out of discursive thinking, and that's not going to get you all the way there.
Well, I mean, we shouldn't understand like the rational as like being against like the divine. Maybe it's more accurate to say like the seeming rational. Like a divine madness is fully casting aside the seeming rational for the truly rational.
Sure, yeah, and I'm not saying that they're contrary to one another or anything like that, but I think from an aspect of sort of spiritual practice, I think it's easy to mistake, the discursive for, you could say, the spiritual.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is connected to what we were talking about with the Henads, because this is indeed the primary role of Dionysus, to be the loosener, to loosen all bonds, including the bond of intellection, as you said. So it is an important clue to why we situate the gods beyond the level of mind. To those unfamiliar, the basic Platonic sort of levels are the one, the mind, the soul, and us down here. So if the gods are in the level of mind, then how do they allow us to loosen the bonds even of mind? So they have to be operating on some level above the level of intellection. And Dionysus does exactly that. He steps in and loosens the bond even of intellection, so you can understand things irrationally, so to speak. So the gods have to be operating from a level even beyond intellection. And then you hit the one. So that's why Proclus situates them where he situates them as the highest Henads.
I mean, yeah, that seems just about right.
And yeah, I am very pro maximalism, I must say. Maximalism is good.
Well, I mean, we are in a society that is seemingly maximalist, but and is in fact, minimalist in many regards.
No, it is pathetically impoverished. We need to bring back a glorious maximalism, a baroque overdoing of things to the point where it becomes absurd and ridiculous how much you overdid it.
Yes.
It's our age is very minimalist and impoverished.
We need a return of proper garishness.
Yeah, yeah. It would be seen as garishness in our times because, when you look at profoundly rich people and you look at their houses, they're large, but they're empty. And I'm thinking, you paid 7 million for this house. Why is it empty? Because it's cool to be empty. You have something that you overpaid for, and it's all sleek surfaces. No, if you're rich, you should have everything in there, right? Why did you pay all this money for it to be just a large empty space?
Does anyone else have anything further to say, like specific henadological ideas that you want to touch on?
No, I got nothing else to add on that. I actually got to jump off here. Got something coming up, so.
I mean, I feel like the conversation is reaching its natural end. I don't have anything further to say.
Yeah, me neither. I'm good.
All right. Well,
there's much more to say on this subject, but we will probably we have reached the end of this cycle of it.
Yeah. We'll if we can get Helio in here, I'm sure he'd have plenty to say.
International Man of Mystery Helio.
But fruitful discussion. I hope everyone enjoyed listening to this as much as we enjoyed discussing it. And we will see you some other time. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.